If you guys would like to join us next year.
everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Opening night is a very special night, as you all are aware. Our live streaming is brought to you by Carib Trans. We also have many other sponsors. Edie and her husband, Dave, are sponsored by Mars Cottage, which is a beautiful college just by Brigadoon. And we would also like to give a special thank you to Prince Bernhard Culture Funds and the public entity of SEBA for their support. And as always, we'd like to thank all of our other sponsors. We have many, as you can see, 30-some sponsors. And new this year, we have some awesome raffle prizes for sale. So for $5 each, you can win a Pareo by Anna Keen. It's made by indigo leaves found here on SEBA. And then we have a 3-night stay at Compass Cottage, a 3-night stay at Convent Cottage, a 3-night stay at Flamboyant Cottage, and a 3-night stay at Spyglass Villa. So if you're looking for a place to stay on SEBA, we have some really great places. We also have a guided hike led by SEBA Conservation Foundation, so you can explore one of SEBA's beautiful trails. We have pieces of jewelry by Marie, as well as Jobine. She is giving us a little mermaid and fish figurine, as well as a class, so you can learn how to make glass beads. We also have a handcrafted knife by the one and only John Magor. And yes, and we also have a gift basket by Sabin Rock Living, and a 1-week stay on the Caribbean Explorer 2, drinks, diving, everything included for a week. So those are all of our great raffle prizes this year. And before we get into the main event, just some upcoming events at a glance. Tomorrow at 5:30 p.m., Edie will be having a sunset snorkel, so you can learn more about sea fireflies. And then on Sunday is our next presentation by Erica Moulton, who is a ROV expert, and that will be at the Brigadoon. And then the next day, on October 4th, Erica Moulton will be teaching you how to build your own ROV at the pool at Juliana's Hotel. And now for tonight's keynote speaker, we have Dr. So let's take a moment and think about is there any aspect in the ocean that scares any of you? Any creatures? Going too deep? Anything? Anyone? Tiger sharks? We have one of those lurking on SEBA, apparently. Yeah. Anyone else? No? A lot of you are divers, so. I'm scared of the dark. You're scared of the dark? Oh, you may not want to be here for this. Yeah, camera flooding. All right. So our speaker tonight has dedicated her life to design ways to explore our ocean floors. Dr. Edie Witter is a scientist of the deep sea and the astounding creatures that live there, and what you see tonight will be sure to amaze you. She has a master's degree in biochemistry and PhD in neurobiology, both from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Dr. Witter is a proud MacArthur Fellow and recently authored a book. In the water, she has piloted deep diving submersibles and made landmark breakthroughs, like being the first ever to film the giant squid in its natural habitat, while she had to survive a lightning strike to get it. On land, she has worked to map pollution and water quality, all while founding an organization dedicated to protecting the marine ecosystems, the Ocean Research and Conservation Association. I present to you the deep diving scientist herself, Dr. Edie Witter.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here back in SEBA. So the last time I was here was 2012 for See and Learn, and my husband and I fell in love with this island, absolutely. And actually, so much so that Emily mentioned that I have a book that just came out, which is actually a memoir, and chapter 2 begins with the dive I led at SEBA, going out to find the sea fireflies there. So part of the goal of that book is to advance education and pretty much do what See and Learn tries to do all the time. But I'd love to hear that you end up getting some people coming to visit because of that, because the book is mostly about my great love, which is bioluminescence. So tonight I want to start out by talking about exploration, which is something that is dear to the heart of See and Learn. And we are all explorers. Ancient map makers used to create maps with monsters drawn at the edge of the map to indicate the areas that hadn't been mapped as yet, and as a warning to explorers, this is dangerous territory, stay away. But it always seemed to have the opposite effect. It drew people in to explore the unknown areas, because we are all essentially explorers. The first time you crawled away from the safety of your mother's arms to see what was around that next corner, you were being an explorer. We are born in this world as strangers in a strange land, and we have to figure it out. And so exploring is essential to our survival. It is how we found out which animals were safe to be around and which could attack us, which food was safe to eat and which wasn't. And we gather that information and then share it with each other, and it has made survival possible in this somewhat strange land that we live in. Our drive for exploration has driven many of our modern achievements, our most remarkable innovations. It's essential to our well-being throughout history, but now I think more than ever. So how is it possible that this planet of explorers has not explored their own planet? We have explored such a tiny part of our planet. The number you hear most often is 5% of the ocean has been explored and mapped. Actually, it depends on what you mean by mapped. Most of the time what they're talking about is side-scan sonar, so it's done remotely from a ship, and the resolution is about 100 meters, about a football field. So imagine just putting a wet blanket over the bottom, and you can see a few of the bumps and whatever, but you're certainly not going to see the animal life, which is what I want to be seeing when I'm talking about exploring the ocean. So if you're talking about side-scan sonar at high resolution, we're getting up close now to maybe 30% of the bottom of the ocean mapped at that kind of resolution. But if you're talking about actually visiting the bottom of the ocean, then we're talking about only 0.05% of the bottom of the ocean has been visited. And that's it. So, how can we possibly understand life on our ocean planet when we've explored so little of it? That's the equivalent of having explored only 3 square city blocks of the entire island of Manhattan. And that only at ground level. The oceans are on average 2.3 miles deep. And so we're talking about just such a tiny, tiny part of our planet that's been explored. We hear all the time that we live on an ocean planet, but I think people that don't get to live on Saba aren't as appreciative of that as they might be. One way to see it is to look at the planet from the Pacific side. That's all the land you can see. We are an ocean planet, and every drop of water in that ocean is filled with life. This is the machinery of life that keeps things running. Now, I do not like to preach doom and gloom, but I feel a responsibility as a scientist to share just a few of the things that we're facing right now, but I promise I'm going to make this really fast, just so we can all be on the same page. So I think most of us know that the planet is heating up at an alarming rate, and the ocean has been absorbing a lot of that heat, but it's reaching its capacity, and it's now having impacts on things like the thermohaline circulation pattern, which are the rivers that run through the ocean like the Gulf Stream that carry heat around the planet. That thermohaline circulation pattern has been stabilizing our climate for 10,000 years. That's why we've been able to have agriculture over that period of time. But if that breaks down and we go back to what it was like before 10,000 years ago, before the thermohaline circulation pattern, then agriculture is not going to be possible as we know it now, certainly, because it's just not going to be predictable enough. And we're already starting to see problems with that. We are acidifying the ocean. So that red line is atmospheric CO2 going up over time. The green is the CO2 in the ocean, and the blue is the pH dropping, because as CO2 dissolves in seawater, it becomes carbonic acid. That is a staggering thing to think about, because we are talking about changing the chemistry of a volume of 300 million cubic miles. We've changed the chemistry of that volume, and it's having an impact on corals being able to make their skeletons, on sea butterflies being able to make their shells. It's impacting a lot of animals already. In the shellfish industry is well aware of it. We're also filling the oceans with our plastics and our toxins at an alarming rate. It's now estimated by the year 2050, we will have more plastic by weight in the ocean than fish. And then there is the decimation that is done by bottom trawling. This is a bottom trawling net. They have these rollers that run across the bottom of the ocean so that the bottom dwelling shrimp and fish jump up into the net. But what happens when they do this is they take beautiful undersea gardens that took 1,000 years or more to grow and turn them into a moonscape that won't sustain life for hundreds of years. Saba has a reputation as a leader in conservation. It would be wonderful if Saba would commit to sustainable seafood. The shrimp and the bottom fish that are trawled this way shouldn't be eaten, because this is just unbelievable stupidity, and I've seen what it looks like. It's just horrible. But it's going on out of sight and out of mind. Bottom drilling, like what happened with the Deepwater Horizon in 2010, obviously that can have catastrophic effects. And we have another one coming upon us right now. We're just on the edge of mining the sea floor for metals. And it's going to be decimating the sea floor. And once again, it's incredibly short-sighted. Some of the companies that are doing this are trying to claim that they need them to be able to do solar panels and the things that we need to convert to a low-carbon footprint. That's not necessarily true, and it's mostly about making money in a very short term at the expense of the rest of us. So it all comes down to numbers. These hockey stick curves of CO2 concentration, species extinctions, motor vehicles, fisheries exploited, it all comes back to population. Just the numbers of people on the planet are problematic. And clearly, this is probably the most important thing I tell you tonight, and scientists are telling you this all the time, but we don't seem to be getting the message across. And there are a couple of theories about why this is. One is the boiling frog story, the idea that if you drop a frog into boiling water, it'll have the sense to jump out, but if you heat it slowly, you can stew it before it jumps out. Well, personally, I think frogs are smarter than that, and I really want to believe that humans are. And the other concept is that Martin Luther King Jr. did not mobilize the civil rights movement by claiming, "I have a nightmare." But that's what the environmental community is doing all the time. And it's no wonder people shut down. They don't want to read it. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to see it anymore. None of us want to see this anymore. And I think the mistake is the doom and gloom. Yes, we have to convey that message to the public, but I think we need to appeal to what is our greatest instincts as human beings, and that is as explorers. Being explorers has always been what saved us, to understand the natural world, to be able to work with it instead of against it. And so I think we need to tap into that instinct in a much greater extent than we've ever done before, because being explorers requires optimism. Explorers are the optimists. They're the ones that are going to go ahead, despite the monsters at the edge of the map, and try to figure out the solutions. And that's why we need them now more than ever. So how do we explore our ocean planet? Well, remarkably, the primary way we do it is by dragging nets behind ships like this one. And I defy you to name any other branch of science that still depends on 1,000-year-old technology. But that's the case. Marine biologists claim that nets only capture the slow, the stupid, and the greedy. The slow that don't outrun the nets, the stupid that don't realize they should, and the greedy that dive into the net to try to get a fast meal and don't get out in time. And all this does is provide us this jumbled mess of shrimp and fish and squid and jellyfish that are shredded, and they don't provide us any kind of sense of what life is like down there. So if we want to see the life in the ocean, obviously it's much better if we go to it than we try to bring it to us. And we can do that with submersibles. This is the Johnson Sealing submersible, which I've made hundreds of dives in, or with remote operated vehicles like you see here. And they are a way of exploring the ocean, but they use bright white lights on animals that have incredibly sensitive eyes, and they are very noisy. They produce a lot of high-pitched whine, especially the hydraulics. So I felt like, we're probably scaring the animals away that we might want to see. And it was because of my interest in finding a new way of exploring the ocean that I got invited on a giant squid hunt. So the Kraken, as it was known, was a creature of legend that was rumored to be able to carry men and ships to watery graves. They claimed that a Kraken floating at the surface could be mistaken for an island. It was so big. And for a long time, scientists thought these were just sailors' stories, that they had no real basis in fact. But then in 1861, a French warship operating off the Canary Islands came upon one of these behemoths floating at the surface. It was barely alive. They usually don't come to the surface unless they're dying. And the only reason they do float when they die is because they have ammonia in their tissues. And that's unusual, so that causes them to float when they die. How many animals are there down in the ocean we don't know about because they don't happen to float when they die? Anyway, this one was dying, so they fired a couple cannon shot at it to make sure it was fully dead. And then they wrapped a line around it, and they made drawings of it, of what it looked like. And then they tried to pull it onto the ship, but it was so heavy that the line actually cut through the body. And the head and the arms and tentacles fell away, and they were able only to bring back the mantle, the back end of the squid. But that was enough to convince the scientific community that it was a real creature, in fact, related to squid, which, of course, they were aware of squid. They just didn't realize they could get that big. And so it got written up in scientific publications, and it was at the same time that Jules Verne was writing his science fiction novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, so he included a battle with the giant squid as part of the most dramatic scene in that book, and it helped add to its legendary status. So over the years, these have floated up in a number of places. Scientists have studied their dead carcasses, and there's been papers written about their taxonomy. But there was this great desire to be able to see what one of these looked like in its natural habitat. And so there have actually been a lot of expeditions mounted in order to go find the giant squid. One of the biggest was a multinational effort down in New Zealand in March 97 and March 1999. And none of these were successful. Very, very expensive. And they didn't really want to keep going after the squid. But the reason I got involved in this was not because I'm a giant squid hunter, but was because of my fascination with this ability of animals to make light. So after I got my PhD, I actually got an opportunity to make a series of deep-sea dives in this diving suit that was developed by the offshore oil industry for diving on oil rigs down to 2,000 feet. And I was with a group of scientists that were testing it as a tool for a way to explore this largest place on the planet that has been so inaccessible to us in the past. And my first dive was in the Santa Barbara Channel. I went down to 800 feet, and I turned out the lights. It was an evening dive. I turned out the lights because I knew I would see bioluminescence, but I just was unprepared for how much there was. It was staggering. It was like a starry night under a desert, but all of the stars were just swirling around. It was like Van Gogh's Starry Night. It was just absolutely breathtaking. But if I turned on the lights, there didn't seem to be anything there. It was phenomenal. Now, usually if people are familiar with animals making light, it's these guys, fireflies, and there's a few other kinds of land animals that can make light. There's earthworms and millipedes, centipedes, there's even some fungi. But in general, it's pretty rare on land, and so people assume the same thing is true in the ocean. Nothing could be further from the truth. Most of the animals in the open ocean environment make light. In most of the open ocean, 75% at least make light, and there's places where it's as many as 90%. And they do it to help them survive in a dim light environment. So a lot of them have built-in flashlights, like you see here, or high beams, like you see there. This is one of my favorite fish, the viper fish. It has a luminescent fishing line, a lure on the end of this modified dorsal fin ray that it arches in front of the toothy jaw that gives the viper fish its name. So those teeth are so long that if they closed inside the mouth of the fish, it would actually impale its own brain. So they slide in grooves on the outside. Everything on this fish lights up. It's got a flashlight. It's got light organs in the mouth, and I've seen them flash, and these teeth are translucent. It makes the teeth look like they're flashing. There's these jewel-like light organs on the belly that are used for a type of camouflage. There's a light organ in every single fish scale. The mucus layer on the back and on the belly is got this network of little tiny lights in it. When that lights up, it outlines the shape of the body. All these lights, we can only guess at what they're for, because we don't have the opportunity to sit down there and observe the way we've observed animals on land. And that's always driven me kind of crazy. I really want to know more about how they're using their luminescence. Thanks to Pixar, people know about anglerfish, or at least they think they do. It's got this glowing lure that hangs in front of all these needle-sharp teeth. It's kind of like a living mouse trap. I was very pleased that Finding Nemo included bioluminescence, my favorite thing. I do wish, given their budget, that they might have spent just a tiny bit more money, maybe to pay a graduate student that could have told them that those are the eyes of an animal that has been preserved in formalin. These are the eyes of a living anglerfish. And she's got this glowing lure up here that she uses to attract food to her, but she also uses it possibly to attract a mate. Because anglerfish most of the anglerfish you see are females. And they are much, much larger than the males. The males in the anglerfish world are what are known as dwarf males. This little guy has no visible means of self-support. He has no lure for attracting food, and actually no teeth for eating it if he found the food. His only hope for existence on the planet is as a gigolo. He's got to find himself a babe, and then he's got to latch on for life. So this little guy found himself this babe, and you will note he's had the good sense to attach himself in a way that he doesn't actually have to look at her. However, he knows a good thing when he sees it, and so he seals the relationship with an eternal kiss. Her flesh fuses with his lips, her bloodstream grows into his body, and he becomes nothing more than a little sperm sac, providing sperm on demand. And she doesn't have to be monogamous. This is a different species, a transparent angler, and she has 2 males attached. I believe the record for any angler is 8 males attached, because some women are greedy. So the other use of bioluminescence in the ocean has to do with this massive game of hide and seek that goes on all the time out there. It's just as important in the ocean as it is on land for prey to be able to sneak up, to hide from predators, and predators to be able to sneak up on prey. But how do you do that in this environment? There's no trees or bushes to hide behind. And so animals have to be able to hide their silhouette from predators that are swimming below them. And one way they can do that is they can evolve to swim faster than their predators, or they can go down deep where it's dark. And so that's what an enormous number of animals in the open ocean environment do. As the sun sets, they come up to the food-rich surface waters where photosynthesis occurred in order to be able to eat. And then as the sun rises, they dive back down into the depths to hide in the darkness until the next day. But that's why they spend so much of their life in darkness and why bioluminescence is so critical to their survival. So this is a typical deep-sea predator. It's got upward pointed eyes and an upward pointed mouth, and it's looking around for a shadow that will tell it there's food down there. But all the time it's doing that, it's got to worry about something bigger and nastier under it doing the same thing. So it's got this really narrow silhouette. That shape of a fish is not for hydrodynamic reasons. If you want to swim fast, you're big and round like a tuna or a shark. But if you want to minimize your silhouette, you're flat. You've got silver sides that help reflect the light downward. And then a tremendous number of these animals take it one step further and produce light from their bellies. Now, I've seen books try to claim that they produce pink light because they look at what look like pink filters. But actually, they're just filters that narrow the spectrum of the light, so it's a perfect match in blue to the sunlight penetrating through seawater. And you may think, well, how is that camouflage? Because you can see the individual spots. But a lot of these animals have very low resolution eyes. They have very blurry vision because they've sacrificed some of their resolution for sensitivity. And also, if you've ever opened your eyes underwater, you know things look pretty blurry underwater anyway. So that kind of blends together pretty perfectly. And if a cloud goes over the sun and dims the sunlight, the fish will dim its bioluminescence. So it just remains a perfect match. It's not, it's so many different fish that can do this. This is a little tiny fish, about that big, called the bent-toothed bristlemouth. And it is the most common vertebrate on the planet. The most common animal with a backbone is that little fish, and it is bioluminescent. It has belly lights that it uses to help eliminate its silhouette. All krill use this trick too. They have these beautiful little light organs that are actually could counter-rotate. So if the shrimp tilts its body up to swim up in the water, they counter-rotate so they're pointing straight down, or if it tilts its body down, they counter-rotate that way. So they're always pointing straight up and down. This squid is one that I caught from the submersible in the Bahamas, and it can actually change the color of its luminescence depending on whether it's down deep during the day, counter-illuminating against sunlight, or up near the surface at night, counter-illuminating against moonlight. So down deep, it produces a pure blue light. You're not going to see it here because this was actually filmed with a monochrome camera. But when I changed the temperature and warmed it, it started to produce a blue-green light because it turned on a whole different set of light organs. So incredible complexity in these animals in order to use their bioluminescence in all these very clever ways. And then there's animals that can produce luminescence that they spew out into the water. This shrimp will actually vomit light into the face of a predator, like a fire-breathing dragon, in order to temporarily blind the predator while it pulses away into the darkness. There's even fish that can do this. This is a fish that is called the shining tube shoulder because it literally has a tube on its shoulder that produces light. And I was a consultant on Blue Planet, the first Blue Planet, and we captured this fish off the northwest coast of Africa. And that's in the lab on the ship. I'm holding it, and I just touched the tube on its shoulder. And it's not just that it's an astonishing amount of light that it puts out, but it's putting out whole cells. Not just the chemicals, luciferin and luciferase, that make the light, but whole cells. So it's energetically incredibly costly for this fish to do this, but we don't know why. And how are we ever going to know unless we can sit down there and watch? So this has bothered me for a long time. Here's another example. This is a deep-sea jellyfish, Atolla. And the speculation was that its very, very showy display that is a pinwheel of light that goes around and around the jellyfish is what is known as a bioluminescent burglar alarm. It's the same reason you have a beeping horn and flashing lights on your car as a burglar alarm. It's meant to attract attention in the hopes that it'll scare the burglar away or bring the police that will take the burglar away. So this light show is thought to be like a scream for help with light. It's meant to attract attention. So you've got this jellyfish down in the depths, hanging out, A lot of things down there are red because being red is as good as being black when the only available light is blue light. Red pigment absorbs blue light. So it's essentially invisible, but somehow a predator finds it and starts munching on it. Well, now the jellyfish lights up, and in so doing, it makes its predator visible to its predators. I apologize for the art, but I got tired of trying to explain this without graphics. That's my art. After I show you this video, I got a lot of inquiries about why squid like jellyfish. I said, no, they don't like jellyfish. They're looking for whatever's eating the jellyfish. So I was trying to develop this camera system called the Eye in the Sea that I could leave on the bottom of the ocean that would be able to observe unobtrusively. But that meant I couldn't use white light because I didn't want to scare the animals away. So I wanted to use red light. But the problem was every time I tried to push the spectrum to where they wouldn't see it, they'd still see it. And it just seemed like I was between a rock and a hard place. But I found a solution by imitating this fish. So most of the animals in the deep ocean produce blue light, and most of the animals can only see blue light. This stoplight fish is different. It can produce blue light and it can see blue light, but it can also produce red light and it can see red light. And when I was measuring the emission spectra from the red light organ, I peeled off this filter and measured the filter, and it was a sharp, sharp cutoff filter, and I thought, wow, it's giving up a lot of energy in the longer wavelengths, the shorter wavelengths. Why is it doing that? And so I imitated that with the Eye in the Sea illumination system. I put a sharp cutoff filter on it and finally had this system working where I could tell the animals weren't seeing it. And then I wanted to be able to test how they responded to bioluminescence, so I created this electronic jellyfish that imitates certain bioluminescent displays. I had a really tough time getting this funded because every time I tried to go to a funding agency to get the funding for it, they would say, okay, but what will you discover? And I kept saying, that's the point, I don't know, I think we've been scaring stuff away. So I kludged this together from a bunch of different funding sources, and you can see what a kludge it was because you can still see the word Ziploc in the mold that we used to make the electronic jellyfish. So the first time I got to test this was in 2004, and we put it on the bottom. Now this doesn't look like much here, but there's a fish down in the corner here, and it's swimming towards the camera. And I had a really crummy camera. Nobody else was going to get excited about this, but I was thrilled beyond words because I had a window into the deep sea, and I could see for the first time what life was like down there when I wasn't down there disturbing it. Then 4 hours into the deployment, I had programmed the electronic jellyfish to come on for the very first time. I swear this is true. This never happens in life. 86 seconds after I turned it on, I recorded this. Oh, okay, there's the fish I was telling you about. That's right, I've got to double-click these. That was my fault. Okay, so this is what we recorded. Wait a minute. Sorry. There it is. That is a squid over 6 feet long, completely new to science. Could not even be placed in any known scientific family. I went back to the National Science Foundation and I said, this is what we will discover. And they gave me $500,000 to do it right. So doing it right involved creating the world's first deep sea webcam, which we plugged in Monterey Canyon. And it was down there for 8 months recording. So there was just basically this power bar on the bottom of Monterey Canyon at almost 990 meters deep. This is plugging it in for the first time, and this was so thrilling. This is so much better for me than any spacewalk I could ever imagine. And this is actually an electrical connection that you can make in seawater, underwater at 1,000 meters. That's pretty amazing engineering. And so that's the power bar, and there were a bunch of plugs so you could plug in different experiments. So I had 50 meters of cable going out to my moored version of the Eye in the Sea, and I had a bunch of experiments that I could set up on it. You'll be able to see the red lights on it in a second, and there was an electronic jellyfish, And I was streaming this to the web, people were watching it in real time. So there's the newer version of the electronic jellyfish. And so every time we turn that on, we seem to get some kind of response to it. So this is the kind of recording we got. Let me see if I can get that running. There you go. So that was a juvenile Humboldt squid. And we see them come in. They usually come in very fast, which is what you'd expect for a burglar alarm. It's looking for whatever is attacking the jellyfish. And when it comes in and doesn't find it, it squirts ink in disgust and swims away. And so I have many, many recordings like this. There was this one that I love. This is what I call the Einstein of Squid, because this guy comes in and he really figures out right away this isn't right. So he's not fooled. He goes, wait a minute. There's supposed to be food there. But he's very persistent. No, I know there's got to be something making that jellyfish go. Come on, where are you? And then he goes away and he thinks about it for a little while and he thinks, well, maybe if I come in from a different angle? No, not so much. So I showed that video to this organization that was putting together an expedition, the Japan Broadcasting Corporation in conjunction with the Discovery Channel. And it was an expedition that happened in 2012 off the Ogasawara Islands south of Japan. This is the Marianas Trench down here, the deepest place in the ocean. I was with a group of 3 scientists. That Tsunemi Kubedera on the left had actually gotten the first still images of a giant squid at that location, which is why we were at that site. Steve O'Shea was a giant squid hunter from New Zealand. So I was the only non-giant squid hunter on the expedition, and there was a lot of skepticism about my approach. But I had this new version of the Eye in the Sea that had an intensified camera and red light illumination and the electronic jellyfish. And so this is putting it out there. And narrower spectrum. And so with this version of the Eye in the Sea, I could just throw it off the back of the ship, and I didn't need a submersible or a remote operated vehicle. It's very distinctive. And it had been very attractive to squid in Monterey Canyon, so we hoped it would be attractive to giant squid, which, by the way, have the largest eyes of any animal in the animal kingdom, so we thought might be a visual predator. So when it was time to recover it, we'd go find the buoy, hook it, bring it on to the ship, and then we'd have to review the video. Well, because it was a TV production, they had cameras running all the time, so they caught the moment when Winsung Chung and I were reviewing it until this. And then, given that success, we were also using a Triton submersible. And in this case, we were trying to use kind of the same concept. I had convinced Kubedera of the importance of using red light, not to scare it away. And he was using a bait squid, which he attached a light to that imitated sort of what I was doing with the electronic jellyfish. And so this is the moment. We need to dim the lights again. You can see the bait squid right here, and you're going to see the giant come in. So it's first seen under red lights. Here's the giant coming in for the attack. And then Kubedera got so excited that he turned on his white flashlight to try to see it better. But when it didn't scare the squid away, he decided to risk turning on the white lights. And sure enough, the squid stuck around, because once it has a meal, it doesn't want to give it up. So this creature of legend that had been so long talked about, we finally brought into high-resolution video, and we filmed it for 23 minutes. And it was so different than any of us had imagined. Any giant squid we'd ever seen dead at the surface were red. This looked like it was cut from metal. It looked like brushed bronze and brushed aluminum. It would go back and forth. Look at the size of that eye. That eye is about the size of a soccer ball. And this enormous funnel, just an incredible creature. And, so far, so so often portrayed as a monster, but actually, just almost seems shy in in this case, and it was just munching away on this bait squid for an extended period of time. So we got to share this with the world in a documentary made by Discovery Channel. We had to keep quiet about it for 8 months before the documentary came out, which was really tough. But when it was released, we were horrified by the title they came up with, Giant Squid, the Monster is Real. Well, first of all, of course it's real. We've been studying dead specimens for 100 years, and it's not a monster. So Discovery's version of a compromise was to change the title from Giant Squid, the Monster is Real, to Monster Squid, the Giant is Real. Their thinking being that monster could refer to its size instead of its morals. So just to prove this wasn't a quirk, we did it again in 2019 in the Gulf of Mexico. It was the first time we got to use the Medusa again in this kind of mode. I had actually been using it in Eleuthera for some deep-sea shark studies, but this was the first midwater work we'd ever done with it. So we went out on a little NOAA-funded expedition with the Point Sur, this motley crew, and no television cameras at all. So I can't show you those fantastic moments. This was my partner in crime, Nathan Robinson. I don't know if any of you ever saw that video of the plastic straw being pulled out of the nose of a turtle that led to, say no to straws. That's Nate pulling the straw out of the turtle's nose. The moment, we didn't catch the moment we saw it on camera. We were reviewing the video and so excited by what we were seeing, and I'm going to show it to you in a second, but we actually did get hit by lightning. The ship got hit by lightning, and we all bolted out onto the fantail, and the antenna was blown to bits on the fantail. And we all looked at each other at the same moment and thought, oh my God, we haven't backed up the video yet. We ran back inside, but sure enough, it was okay. And it was very exciting video because you're going to see the giant coming in over here, but the Medusa is bouncing up and down because there's a little bit of wave action at the surface, and the squid is tracking it. It's visually hunting, which it was pretty amazing. And that's the next one here. Here it comes in, and when it attacks, it's almost casual. I mean, it doesn't seem like a monster. It just seems like it's curious. And when we realized we'd done it again, we had a giant squid, we did an interview from the bridge of the ship, because we didn't have to keep it a secret this time. There was no documentary involved, so we shared it with the world right away. We did an interview for the New York Times from the bridge of the ship, and then released the video on NOAA's website, and it went viral instantly. Now, when we did the Giant Squid documentary in when it came out in 2013, I was astonished by the response of people to this documentary. There were giant squid coming out parties all over the world. And I know this because people sent me pictures of their giant squid cakes, giant squid piñatas, giant squid tattoos inked in honor of the occasion. But I figured, okay, that was because the first video ever recorded. Probably the mania has died down. Not so much. When we released this, it went viral, and it was covered by about 400 different outlets all around the world, including Out Magazine, which claimed the G in LGBTQ stands for giant squid. It just got coverage everywhere, which was fantastic, because it gave us an opportunity to talk about how much of the ocean we haven't explored, how much we need to explore in order to be able to maintain the health of our planet, and how these creatures aren't monsters. And a lot of the things that scare us aren't monsters at all once we get to know them. And that was a quote that I like very much from Marie Curie, which I think is incredibly relevant to today's circumstances. Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. And I also like this one from Jacques Cousteau: "The future is in the hands of those who explore." We need explorers now more than ever. So I hope many of you who've shared in the See and Learn experience will share it with others and try to get that sense of attachment to the environment. As Emily mentioned, I have a book that's just come out, Below the Edge of Darkness, which details some of these stories that I just shared with you, including my first dive in Saba, where we found recorded this, or saw the sea fireflies. I think that is all I have, and the questions. Yes.
Why did you decide to imitate a jellyfish with your lights? Why didn't you choose any other fish? Because I think that your predator might be different when you choose a different light.
Yeah, the jellyfish was intriguing to me because it was such a spectacular display, so complicated, and yet this is an animal that doesn't have eyes. So it was clearly directed at something else, and I wanted to see. So I had other displays that I could do with that electronic jellyfish, and actually I did manage to talk to the animals in one case in the Bahamas, where I was using just a flash pattern, and I got something to flash back at me. I'm pretty sure I was saying something sexy, but I'm not positive. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so this may be a complicated question, but you showed, I think something, that one of the screens that you showed fish fluorescent. And we did a dive in Indonesia where we had filters on our lights and we had filters on our masks. And we saw incredible fluorescence in certain animals and corals underwater. And in order for fluorescent light to appear, there needs to be an external light source. So how do fish emit that external light source in order to see the fluorescence?
So okay, there's a lot of confusion about biofluorescence versus bioluminescence. A lot of it because of just misinformation that's been put out there. So you're right, fluorescence requires an external light source. Bioluminescence does not. Fluorescence, the excitation source is light itself, but it just shifts the wavelength from a shorter wavelength to a longer wavelength. Bioluminescence is a type of chemiluminescence. It's just like light sticks. You mix the chemicals together and you produce light. The value of biofluorescence is probably pretty subtle in many cases. And it's not going to be the kind of extreme you get when you bring a UV light, obviously, down into the depths. And so in relatively shallow animals in coral reef situations, you can imagine that the biofluorescence can act as an enhancer of certain signals, and it may be a warning in some cases of toxicity for some of these animals, but there may be others. We just aren't clear on what it's being used for.
The question is, where does the external light source come in order for fish to see the fluorescence?
The only two possibilities are sunlight and bioluminescence. And so sunlight does penetrate. Some UV does penetrate. It's overwhelmed by the longer wavelength light usually, but it still may enhance the signal. It's like that old thing about laundry detergent making your clothes whiter than white. They actually are adding a fluorescent compound to the clothes, and they aren't kidding. They really do make them whiter than white because it converts the ultraviolet light to white light. And so that's maybe what's happening to enhance a signal. But bioluminescence may also play a part because some of the bioluminescence, the spectrum of the light is actually quite broad, and it can extend down into the UV.
In the lights. Yeah. So speaking on that a little bit too, so beyond the visible spectrum of light, things like ultraviolet light and other wavelengths even that penetrate, how deep can some of those light penetrate, and are there any animals that can see it? Like
Yeah.
little mantis shrimp
Yeah, there are. So there's definitely shallow water animals that can see ultraviolet light. But my colleague Tammy Frank is one of the few people that has done measurements of the electroretinograms of deep sea shrimp, and she's discovered some deep sea shrimp that can see ultraviolet light. They see blue light. They have two visual pigments. So they've given up some of their sensitivity to have color vision. And one of the colors is blue and the other is ultraviolet, and we don't know why. And we've had a lot of theories, and we've done a bunch of different experiments, and so far nothing has panned out.
Have they found any reason why even the shallow ones are able to see that stuff? So, the mantis can see fluorescence around the reef, because the reason some of these animals have that has to have some reason, do they think?
Oh yeah, I mean there's a lot of visual signaling going on, and so some of the examples involve toxicity, advertising toxicity. It's a defense, I'm toxic, don't eat me. Anybody else?
Can we go giant suit hunting along table?
Probably. I mean, they are fairly ubiquitous. The giant squid are actually more common than you might think based on the number of giant squid beaks that have been found in sperm whale stomachs. It's thought that there's probably millions of them out there. So in the deep ocean, there could be a lot of places, and yeah, could be.
What temperature are we talking?
What?
What temperature is the ocean at?
Around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It's chilly. It's very chilly. Actually, if you noticed me in the wasp suit, I used to tell people that diving in that metal suit, changed my understanding of the ocean. Also changed my understanding of the expression "colder than a witch's tit." So I'd come up from those. I wore a wool cap and a wool sweater and gloves, and I'd come up after a 5-hour dive with my teeth chattering and my lips blue, and this old oil rig diver, Charlie, that was in charge of the dives, he kind of took pity on me, and he pulled me aside, he put his arm around my shoulder, and he said, "Look, I'll let you in a little secret, but you got to promise not to tell any of these other guys." I said, "Sure, Charlie, what is it?" "Pantyhose," which is kind of like silk underwear, but I was never sure which kept me warmer, the pantyhose or the vision in my mind of Charlie wearing pantyhose. Yeah, Gigi.
So since those first few discoveries that you guys are making, have people been seeing a lot more giant squids out in the wild, or are they still very, very...
No, and every time they want to, they call me. I'm getting a lot of inquiries from television, but they don't know how much it costs. It's very expensive to go out on these expeditions. So we're actually working on a camera that is low cost and small enough that it can be used off a yacht, for example. And that would open this up to a whole lot of other people. And so we've actually got the camera built and had the first tests with it. So we're getting there. Yeah.
Is there any other deep sea creature that you want to lure out to try and find if it's real from a story? Or
Next month.
yeah, what's the next monster? I suppose?
I think there's probably monsters down there that we haven't seen. I mean, we're constantly finding new squid, pretty big ones, of new species. So I think it's definitely possible, especially when you really get a grasp on how little we've actually looked.
And are you going to try any different light sequence or imitate any different animal to try and lure out something else in a squid?
We would like to try some other types of displays, but right now we're trying to keep it simple so that we can keep the costs down. Yeah.
Is the purpose of creating this smaller camera to get more units out there so you have a better understanding of how many there are?
Right. And, there's a lot of yachts out there that are just going unused, and they could be deploying these things, and it could be very valuable data, so we really want to see if we can promote this idea. Yeah?
Do you think that the giant squids are apex predators, or do they have, predators themselves? And the second part of the question is, what made you think that a giant squid would go after like a smaller squid, basically an animal within its same species?
So, it's not the apex predator. Giant squid are fed on by sperm whales. In fact, it's thought that that's why they have such large eyes. It's probably to detect the sperm whales coming by the bow wave they produce and the bioluminescence that they're stimulating. I'm sorry, what was the next part of that?
You used the smaller squid as the bait for the...
Oh, squid eat...
So what made you think that a smaller squid would be, like the giant squid would go after an animal?
Squid are very fussy eaters. Mostly they only eat other squid. And actually, Humboldt squid are so fussy they mostly eat each other. They're cannibals. But yeah, squid are pretty specific about, I mean, they will eat fish under some circumstances, but they prefer squid.
Well, it is pretty good.
I like it. And it's pretty sustainable. They grow very, very fast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'd like to thank you all once again for coming, both in person and on live. And we'd also like to thank our sponsors again. Thank you, Busy Bee, for hosting us and accommodating us, even though we had to move venues. So I would recommend you guys to go out and support them, buy some dinner, buy some drinks, and we will see you next time. Thanks for coming.